Good morning, everyone. So today we're going to be looking at the subject of ritual and devotion. There's a number of approaches we could take. We could look at your response to ritual and devotion and how that could be affected by your upbringing, whether you had a religious upbringing, and whether that religious upbringing was positive or negative, or if you're an atheist, that may have an effect on how we approach ritual and devotion, and so on. But I thought we'd take a different approach this morning, and in a way do more of a case study of ritual and devotion. The first thing it's worth saying is ritual and devotion is an important aspect of Buddhism, but the Buddha was very, very clear that ritual and devotion, or rites and rituals as he sometimes called it, had a purpose. It wasn't an end in itself. So in the Buddha's time, you had the Brahmins, and the Brahminical class were, if you like, the purveyors of rites and rituals. They had the exclusive access, if you like, the exclusive rites. So if you needed any rituals or rites done, then you had to go and see the Brahmins. And this was passed from family to family. But the rituals as a result became quite empty and lost their purpose. So it's interesting, in the Buddha's time, he would often speak to Brahmins and maybe ask them about the rituals they were doing. And he would then, in a way, say, actually, the real purpose of this ritual isn't what you think it is, it's this. So he very much saw that there's a place for rites and rituals, for ritual and devotion within Buddhism, but it was an end, or a means to an end, rather than an end in itself. So that's quite important. So it's not an empty ritual. It needs to mean something and have a purpose, have an end result. So today we're going to go and have a look at Shantideva. So if you're here last week, I mentioned Shantideva. He was the one who said, if the ground is rough, you have two options: cover the world with leather or wear sandals. So Shantideva lived in northern India in the late 7th to early 8th century, not entirely sure when. And he was a monk at Nalanda. Nalanda was one of the big monastic centers of Buddhism. And he had a reputation of being quite a lazy monk who just seemed to sleep all the time and eat and not really do any monk things, I suppose. So the other monks weren't impressed, and they thought they'd kind of set him up and make him give a teaching, which they thought either he would make a mess of or he would avoid and run away from the monastery. So everyone gathered, not really expecting much. And Shantideva gave a teaching in verse, said to be about 1,000 verses, which became known as the Bodhicharya Vatara, or the guide to the Bodhisattva's way of life. And it turns out this so-called lazy monk who just kind of slept and ate was very, very deeply learned. And in a way, this is his instruction. And it's in verse. It's probably a classic of religious literature, not just Buddhist literature. And it's certainly a classic of what we'd call the Mahayana. The Mahayana was a later development of Buddhism in India, which I'm not going to go into the whole detail of history in Buddhism. That'd be a whole new talk. But it was a re-emphasis of the Buddha's loving kindness and compassion. So if you were here at the class earlier, we'd have done the Metta-bhavana, development of loving kindness. So it was re-emphasizing that altruistic aspect of Buddhism, which somehow got lost. So yes, so he gave this long talk in 1,000 verses called The Way to the Bodhisattvas, or the Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life. in that, he talks about something. I'm going to read something he's written, and then talk about what he's talking about. So he says of this, whatever we'll find out in a moment, it is the elixir of life which destroys death, the destroyer of all, a limitless treasure to destroy all poverty, the supreme cure for the world's sickness. It is a tree of rest for the wearied world, wandering on the road of being. It is a bridge for all travellers, passing over the waters of suffering. It is the heart's waxing moon, cooling the heat of passion. It is a great sun, dispelling the darkness of the world's ignorance. It is fresh butter, churned from the milk of the true Dharma. For the caravan of famished beings, blundering on the road of existence, it is a banquet of joy, which refreshes completely all who hunger for happiness. So what is this it? It's called what he calls the Bodhicitta. Translated, Bodhi means awakening, and Chitta, some of those interesting words. In the West, we're very much split into our hearts and minds, or our kind of emotions and our thoughts. Within Sanskrit and within the Indian context, Chitta encompasses both. So it means heart, it means mind, it means, if you like, our spirit that drives us. Sometimes it's translated as bodhicitta is the will to awakening, or the awakening heart, or the awakening mind. So he describes, as I said, the bodhicitta, things like, I'll read a couple of bits again. It's the heart's waxing moon, cooling the heat of passion. It's the great sun, dispelling the darkness of the world's ignorance. It is a banquet of joy, which refreshes completely all who hunger for happiness. So the bodhicitta, particularly in the Mahayana, but I think for us in the Triratna Buddhist community, is an important idea, or ideal even. The bodhicitta has two aspects. It has a relative aspect. It's a desire for awakening, not just for ourselves, but for all sentient beings. So we get a sense of this when we do the metabhavana, the development of love and kindness. So we're not practicing just for ourselves, but for everyone, and that motivates our practice. It also has an absolute aspect. The absolute bodhicitta is an experience of how things are. We've been looking over the last few weeks at the nature of reality and the conditioned nature of reality. So it's seeing conditioned reality as such, and seeing, as Atulia Mati mentioned a couple of weeks ago, the three marks of conditioned existence, that things are impermanent, insubstantial, and ultimately not able to satisfy us. So the bodhicitta has these two aspects. It has this will to enlightenment for the benefit, or awakening for the benefit of all beings, an altruistic aspect, an experience of reality, which frees us from suffering. And Shantideva also says of the bodhicitta, just as a blind man may find by chance a priceless jewel in a heap of refuge, so somehow this Bodhi spirit is hidden even in me. It's us at our best, is the bodhicitta. Sangharakshita, in a more mythical way, kind of talks about it as something that arises collectively within our movement, that when we come together at our best, and the bodhicitta, this will awakening for the benefit of all beings. So hopefully this got your interest. So how does the bodhicitta arise? And Shantideva tells us in the Bodhicharyavatara how it arises. he says we need to perform Maha puja, which means worship. And this has 7 stages, so some of you can see where this is leading. So these 7 stages, which we'll look at in more detail in a moment, are central to the development of bodhicitta. We see this in the Indo-Tibetan tradition. Any Tibetan ritual will generally start off with what they call the 7-line prayer, which encompasses in 7 lines these 7 spiritual moods. And we in the Tree Rat and the Buddhist community do the 7-fold puja, which is one of our core, if you like, ritual texts. So by doing the 7-fold puja, we can bring about the arising of a desire within ourselves and our community for the awakening of all sentient beings, freeing the suffering of all sentient beings. So this is why we do the 7-fold puja. It's not just something to do for the sake of it. It's not a rite and ritual as an end in itself. It has a purpose. So yeah, so we're going to go through the 7-fold puja, and I'll just make a few comments on each part. So we're going to start off with worship. So hopefully the worship slide will come up. So this is where we start. So also from the text, what's the purpose of worship? Shantideva goes, in order to bring about the arising of the bodhicitta, that precious jewel of the mind, I offer worship to the Buddhas and to the flawless jewel of the true Dharma, as in the teaching, and the sons of the Buddha, or daughters of the Buddha, which is the Sangha, who are all oceans of virtue. So with worship, it's a spiritual mood of what's worthy to us, what's important to us. And in a way, in the words of the verses that we got up in front, it's an offering. So if for those who we hold dear, we often give presents to, in a way, to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and the teachers of the past. In a way, there's a natural sense of gratitude, and out of gratitude becomes a sense of giving. So the things that we give, we do in our mind, in this case, but also in the actual 7-fold puja for those of you who have done it. We also offer candles and incense and flowers, which are 3 traditional offerings. So it's seeing what's worthy, what's our direction, and it's the 3 jewels, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. And then we move on to salutation. So here we pay homage to the Buddhas. It says of the 3 eras, in a way it mentions about the timelessness of Buddhahood, that the potential to reach awakening arises in the past, the present, and it will in the future. If you like, it's an eternal truth. So we want to, in terms of salutation, if you like, bow down to what's worthy, bow down to our ideals. We realize, not in a bad way, that there's a gap between where we are and where we want to be, and also where we want to go. So salutation, in a way, acknowledges that gap. We then move on to going for refuge. If you like, Sangharakshita says this is the central act of a Buddhist. In one of the early suttas, he talks about how people in times of hardship go to refuge, or they seek refuge or shelter in forest groves, in mountains, and so on. where he says the true refuges are the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. It's where we can find a point of safety. We may have more a sense of this at this time. Quite often our lives do feel very safe and secure, and sometimes the idea of wanting to seek a refuge from something may be a bit alien. I think in our current times with the coronavirus at the moment, you can see at times we want a place of safety. We want a sense of being safe. So we may be getting a sense of what going for refuge means a little bit more. So it's not going for refuge to Netflix or thinking about a new job or a new house or anything. What really provides safety is the example of the Buddha, his teachings, and those members of the Sangha who have a direct experience of the Dharma. And usually, as we did earlier, if you came to the actual class, we did the refuges and precepts. And we went for refuge to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha 3 times. Sometimes this can be seen as with body, speech, and mind. But it's also in the Buddha's day, if you ask the Buddha 3 times to do something, then he would assent. And then when we go for refuge, we also take on the 5 Buddhist precepts, which we've covered in this course already. The 5 ethical precepts represent how an awakened one would naturally act. And we're trying to train ourselves to act in that way. So they're training principles again. So we've got this gap of where we are at the moment and where we want to be. And by practicing the precepts and meditation and wisdom, then we can start to bridge that gap and become more awakened, more awake. We then come on to confession of faults. Some people find this an interesting one. I think particularly those people who may have rejected certain aspects of Christianity where confession is an important part of that practice may find the idea of confession hard or has some baggage, if you like. If we're confessing, if you like, our faults in Buddhism, it's not like the Buddha's up there above us and can somehow forgive us and of our sins. It's much more, we realize we want to take on, well, we want to be free from suffering. We want to be happy. We want to experience the supreme bliss of awakening. And we take on the precepts. And we realize at times we fall short of those precepts, which is natural because we're human beings. We're not awakened yet. And really, it's just acknowledging when we fall short, in a way to ourselves as much as to anyone else. Sometimes it's helpful to verbalize where we're falling short and say to our friends, look, I've got this pattern of behavior and I keep doing it and I don't like doing it. It upsets other people. You know, can we look at this and work it through and give me some ideas how I can work with that? And I think that's really good. Sometimes it's just, sometimes we've talked about this before, sometimes if we're unethical, unskillful, then it kind of leaves an aftertaste in the body or in the mind or in the heart. And in a way, it's acknowledging that I've acted unskillful and actually it's not very nice experience for ourselves. And we want to move beyond that. It may not be a nice experience for other people as well. So it's just acknowledging that. It's not to do with blame. It's not to do with guilt. It's going, I want to be awakened. I want to be free from suffering. I want other people to be free from suffering. And this is where I'm falling short. So it should be a natural aspect of our ideals rather than beating ourselves up with a stick or doing something wrong and wearing a sackcloth. And then the mood changes from confession. We come into rejoicing in merits. I think one of the lovely things about Buddhism is it rejoices. Sometimes in the sevenfold puja, we have a mitra ceremony, and it's an opportunity to rejoice in the qualities of that person as they make their commitment to the Tree Rat and the Buddhist community a little bit deeper. I think it's one thing we've got to offer the world. So often the world is very critical of other people, and to rejoice in other people's virtues, good qualities, is special. And also it's important to have our own qualities rejoiced in, because sometimes we have quite a low view of ourselves, and actually hearing maybe over a number of times similar qualities rejoiced in by different people, you start to maybe realize our view of ourselves is not actually correct. We have better qualities than that we don't acknowledge. So we rejoice in merit. And I think in some ways this really encapsulates the bodhicitta. I'll read a little bit. So I rejoice with delight in the good done by all beings. So it's realizing all beings, whether we like people or not, do good, and a wish that through that good actions, may they obtain rest with the end of suffering. May those who have suffered be happy. I think in puja, when we do that, when we repeat that line, may those who have suffered be happy, our heart should just kind of go out to the world. And it says we rejoice in the release of beings from the sufferings of the rounds of existence. So people are awakening. We rejoice in the nature of the Bodhisattva, those that the Bodhicitta has arisen in, the Buddha as well. I rejoice in the arising of the will to enlightenment. So the Bodhicitta, we rejoice in that, and the teachings. So it's a really heartfelt, positive, uplifting mood to rejoice. So it's something we do in puja, and as Buddhists, it's something we can do in our everyday lives. From a spirit of rejoicing, we come into entreating and supplicating. Here we go. So it's saying to the Buddhas, the awakened ones, whether actually, may they make shine the lamp of the Dharma. In a way, may they stay in this world and teach. Because the teaching of the Buddha is our path to freedom. It's our path to the end of suffering. So we want, if you like, those people to stay. They describe it in a way as a light. So remain here for endless ages, that life in this world does not grow dark. So I think this has a number of aspects. It's realizing the preciousness of the teachings and of the teachers. We know that all beings are impermanent, and the Buddha died, and our teachers will die, and we will die. But there's that wish that, if you like, that eternal aspect of the teachings, not that anything's really eternal, but that timelessness of the teachings is there. So there's always access to the Dharma, to that path to freedom. And what normally happens in a puja at the end or after entreaty and supplication, we have a reading, if you like, we have a teaching from the Buddha. And that may be on a particular theme, depending on the context. And we also do the Heart Sutra. So the Heart Sutra is if you like, the heart of Buddhist wisdom. It emphasizes the absolute aspect of the bodhicitta. I'm not going to go into the Heart Sutra now. That would probably deserve a whole course in and of itself. But it's important that we're entreating the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas to keep the teaching alive and then teach us. And then After that, the last of the 7 stages is transference of merit and self-surrender. So it's concept of merit in a way is slightly alien, I think, to our culture. Sometimes kind of think of it as brownie points. Not sure if you still get brownies. I think they've changed them now. But it's the idea, if you like, that you get, reward points for your good behavior. So I think it's more of a sense of direction of being that we build up. And the aspect of transferring our merits is we may act skillfully, we may do good deeds, we may perform puja. And there's always a tendency that our sense of self starts to cling to that. Oh, didn't I have a good meditation? Aren't I wonderful? Wasn't it really good that I was generous to that person or I helped that person? And the kind of sense of self and self-clinging increases. So it's almost like, can I actually do the act and not get caught up in reward? So in a way, what it's saying is, I'm just going to do a skillful act and then let it go and forget about it. It will have an effect, but I don't need to worry about it. Even better, can I do a skillful act and want the benefit of that act, not just to benefit me, but our friends, our family, all sentient beings. So in a way, this encapsulates the spirit of the bodhicitta. So that's transference of merit and self-surrender. So in a way, they're the 7 stages of Maha puja. And if we practice Maha puja, if we practice these 7 spiritual moods, then something maybe arises within us. Maybe something feels like actually it descends because it may not feel like us. Or maybe we do something together, we do puja together, and something else seems like, the effect of it is bigger than the sum of its parts. So it's that sort of thing. So yeah, we do Maha puja, we do these 7 stages, and the spirit of awakening, maybe even in kind of embryonic form, we start to get a sense of, and we develop that, and over time it develops into something else. And then usually at the end of the 7-fold puja, not that it's actually part of the 7 spiritual moods, we have mantras, and we have what we call the concluding mantras. Mantras we can see as sound symbols of different aspects of awakening. So we do these at the end. We have the mantra of different archetypal Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, such as Avalokiteshvara, who's seen as the Bodhisattva of compassion, of Manjushri, the Bodhisattva of wisdom, of Vajrapani, the Bodhisattva of energy, of Tara, who is compassion and wisdom of female form, of Amideva, who is the Buddha of the West, of Shakyamuni Buddha, the historical Buddha, and Padmasambhava. And then we have the Pranya Paramita mantra that we do also at the end of the Heart Sutra, and 3 shantis for peace. So the first shanti is done loudly, peace for the world. Second one, peace for those close to us. And the third one, peace for ourselves. So it just connects us with different aspects of the awakening experience in terms of sound. Some people may have a strong connection with the figures behind them, whether they be archetypal ones or historical figures such as Shakyamuni, the historical Buddha, or Padmasambhava, who was responsible for establishing Buddhism in Tibet. So hopefully that's given you a sense of maybe why we do puja, while we do various rituals and devotions in Buddhism. So it's a mean to an end. So different pujas may have slightly different, or different rituals may have slightly different purposes. So with the sevenfold puja, which is our core one, is in a way developing the bodhicitta, developing this altruistic aspect, that it's not just enough to free ourselves from suffering, but we need to free everyone. We need to practice the path with everyone.